Today's video is about a Texas stripper who changed the life of a preacher forever, but not in the way you expect. How far would someone go when betrayal, disease, and secrets collide in a world built on faith? One phone call, one secret, one pregnancy ignited a chain of events so twisted that no one could see the ending coming. Blood, lies, and forbidden truths intertwine, and every choice has a cost. Are you ready to uncover what really happened? Let's move on to the full story. The sanctuary smelled of polished wood and old hymnals, a quiet place where secrets were supposed to be forgiven. Daniel Harper stood alone behind the pulpit, fingers resting on the worn Bible, his voice steady as he finished the sermon on repentance. Faces watched him with trust, believing every word. He smiled, prayed, and dismissed them, waiting until the doors closed and the echo of footsteps faded into silence. Only then did the weight return. Daniel loosened his tie and sank into the front pew, staring at the cross above the altar. He had preached about confession, about laying sins before God, yet his own truth stayed locked inside his chest. Months earlier, he told himself it had been a moment of weakness, a single night that would never surface again. Texas heat, a lonely drive, a club he should not have entered. He forced the memory away, just as he had done every Sunday since. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Daniel ignored it at first, breathing slowly, counting each breath like a prayer. The vibration came again, longer this time. A call, unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Pastor Harper," a woman said. Her voice was low, strained, unfamiliar, and intimate at once. "Yes," he replied, standing abruptly. "Who is this?" There was a pause, filled with distant traffic and music muffled by walls. "You don't remember me?" she asked. "You should." Daniel's throat tightened. He stepped into the small side room beside the sanctuary, the place parishioners used for private confessions. The irony was not lost on him. "Please," he said quietly, "this isn't appropriate." A soft, bitter laugh came through the line. "Neither was what you did," she said. "I'm pregnant, Daniel." The room seemed to tilt. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "You have the wrong person," he whispered, though his heart was already racing ahead of the lie. "I took the test twice," the woman continued. "And then I went to the doctor. I thought you should know. I thought you'd want to do the right thing." Sweat gathered at his temples. Images flashed through his mind, his congregation, his wife's smile, the sermons archived online forever. "We agreed this was over," he said. "You took the money." "That was before," she replied. "Before I got sick." Daniel's breath caught. "Sick how?" Another pause, heavier than the first. "You gave me more than money," she said slowly. "You gave me a disease." The word echoed in his head, loud and merciless. He felt the walls closing in, the cross above the sanctuary watching in silent judgment. "What are you saying?" he asked, though he already knew. "I'm HIV positive," the woman said, "and so are you." The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone, his reflection dark in the glass. Outside the confession booth, the church stood calm and spotless, unaware that something rotten had taken root within its walls. As he slid down into the chair, trembling, his phone buzzed again, this time with a text message containing an address and a single line. "We need to talk tonight." Daniel knew that address without looking it up, a place glowing red against the highway, far from the church's white walls. He rose unsteadily, straightened his jacket, and whispered a prayer that sounded more like a plea. Somewhere beyond the sanctuary doors, night was falling, and whatever waited for him was no longer content to stay hidden. As he turned off the lights, he understood the confession booth had followed him, and forgiveness would not come cheap. Not anymore, not ever. Neon lights bled red across the highway outside Houston, Texas. The club pulsed like a wound that never fully closed. Inside, Lena Moore danced beneath scarlet bulbs, pretending control. Tonight her smile was practiced. But her eyes stayed watchful. Always men blurred together faces, wallets, cologne, laughter, promises, lies everywhere between songs. She retreated to the bathroom, shaking silently alone. The test strip rested pink, and undeniable in her palm. Lena pressed her forehead against cracked tile. Breathing fast, heart a baby, meant hope, terror, money, leverage, survival, all tangled. She remembered the preacher from months ago, voice soft, commanding. He wore no collar, just confidence, guilt, and hungry eyes. He paid extra for privacy, and asked her real name. She gave Lena not the stage name, stitched to heels. Afterward, he prayed quietly and left cash folded neat behind. She told herself it was nothing different than before. Ever the clinic smelled sterile, unforgiving, nothing like neon fantasy. Outside, the nurse avoided eye contact, sliding papers across the desk. Positive HIV. Positive, the words drilled into her skull deep. Lena laughed, once sharp and empty, then started crying uncontrollably. She wondered who infected who. And when it truly began, the doctor spoke about treatment responsibility partners, reporting laws carefully. Her phone buzzed, unknown name, unanswered calls, piling fast. Tonight she knew whose number it was before checking screen again. Outside night fell thick, humid, unforgiving, like the truth approaching. Lena sat in her car, staring at steering wheel silently. Pregnancy, sickness, disease, secrets converged into one impossible choice. Now she could disappear, abort, lie, or confront the preacher directly. Anger rose stronger than fear, burning hotter than shame inside. She typed a message, then deleted it, then typed again. Finally, she pressed call, listening to ringing echo through darkness. The preacher answered, breathing hard, pretending calm. Authority still there. Lena spoke clearly, forcing strength into every word. She told him about pregnancy first, then paused, deliberately waiting. His silence confirmed everything she already suspected deeply inside herself. Then she told him about the diagnosis, slowly, carefully. Tonight the line crackled as his breath changed rhythm abruptly. Suddenly Lena felt power shift, fragile but intoxicating, dangerous. Within her, this man preached morality, yet hid worse sins than hers. She ended the call, hands trembling, heart pounding wildly. Tonight. Red lights reflected across windshield like warning signals, blinking constantly. Somewhere a church stood silent, believing in its shepherd. Still Lena drove toward home, knowing nothing would stay hidden forever. Tomorrow choices would narrow, consequences sharpen relentlessly. Without mercy left for now, she needed rest, courage, and a plan. Quickly she touched her stomach, whispering an apology softly into darkness. Whatever happened, she refused to carry guilt alone anymore. Now the night swallowed her car as neon faded behind. Slowly far away, Daniel Harper sat shaking inside his church alone. Neither knew yet how blood would stain faith soon enough. Secrets, once awakened, demanded answers, payment and sacrifice from everyone. Lena checked mirrors, half expecting sirens following behind her. Tonight her phone vibrated again. This time a text appeared suddenly. An address glowed on screen, familiar and unwelcome to her. It was the clinic follow-up appointment tomorrow morning. Scheduled. Fear mixed with resolve as she exhaled slowly. Tonight alone, if truth was coming, she would face it standing upright. She did not know the preacher was doing same. Tonight, miles apart, their lives tightened toward collision course, already set under scarlet lights. Choices turned irreversible, suddenly deadly. Forever now. Dawn waited patiently to expose everything they feared most. Soon morning found Daniel Harper still seated in the darkened sanctuary. Sunlight crept through stained glass, coloring the floor in bruised blues and reds. He had not slept. The echo of the woman's voice repeated in his skull, each word cutting deeper than the last. HIV, pregnant. His reflection stared back from the polished wood, a stranger wearing his face. He rose slowly, knees stiff, and knelt where he once felt closest to God. He prayed without words, only fear. Scripture blurred in his mind, replaced by memories of flesh and heat and weakness. He remembered her laugh, sharp and nervous, the way she studied him like she already knew his secrets. Daniel told himself he had been lonely. That loneliness excused nothing, yet explained everything. When the church phone rang, he flinched, but it was only a voicemail reminder about evening service. He deleted it, ashamed. By noon, he sat inside a private clinic miles from town, collarless and anonymous. The nurse asked routine questions, her tone practiced, detached. Daniel answered carefully, omitting sins as though God were not listening. Blood filled a vial, dark and final. As he waited, sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold air. He imagined headlines, whispers, the collapse of everything he built upon sermons and smiles. The doctor returned with folded hands and a careful pause. Daniel knew before words came. Reactive. Confirmatory testing required, treatment options available. The room spun, yet Daniel nodded politely, thanking the doctor as if receiving advice, not a sentence. Outside, he vomited behind the building, wiping his mouth with shaking fingers. The world continued indifferent, cars passing, people laughing. Driving aimlessly, Daniel's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number displayed an address near the highway. He recognized it instantly, a motel where no one asked questions. Memories surged with panic and longing. Another message followed, "We need to talk. Tonight." Daniel pulled over, gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. Every instinct screamed to run, confess, disappear. Instead, he drove home, showered, and practiced calm in the mirror. He rehearsed lies that sounded like mercy. Money could solve this, he told himself. Silence could be bought. God forgave repentant men, and men forgave themselves. As dusk approached, Daniel put on a plain jacket and left the parsonage quietly, not looking back at the church. The address burned in his mind, a destination he could no longer avoid. Whatever waited in that room would demand a price, and Daniel feared it would be paid in more than faith. Night settled quickly as Daniel drove toward the highway, radio off, thoughts loud. Streetlights flickered past like accusations he refused to answer. He wondered if Lena had planned this, if desperation had hardened her voice. Part of him hated her, another hated himself more. He imagined the motel room, curtains drawn, air stale with secrets. He told himself he would control the conversation, set boundaries, offer help. Confession without consequence was possible, he believed. Yet beneath the certainty something darker stirred, a fear that truth once spoken could not be contained. Daniel pressed the accelerator, heart hammering, knowing the meeting would change everything. Ahead, the motel's sign glowed faintly, waiting. He did not see it as temptation anymore, only inevitability. By the time he parked, his hands were steady, resolve fixed. Inside, a woman waited, carrying his sins, his illness, and his future. Daniel stepped from the car, unaware that this bargain would lead to blood. As he walked toward the door, faith and fear twisted together, pulling him closer to a confrontation neither of them could escape, setting the stage for demands, threats, and a desperate negotiation that would decide who survived the truth, and how far they would go to keep it buried forever. The bargain had not yet been spoken, but it was already forming, sharp and dangerous, between them both tonight alone in silence now. The motel room smelled of bleach and old smoke, a neutral ground for sins that needed no witnesses. Daniel closed the door behind him, the click of the lock sounding final. Lena sat on the edge of the bed, jacket still on, hands folded tightly in her lap. For a moment neither spoke. The air between them carried months of avoidance and one unavoidable truth. "You came," Lena said quietly, eyes fixed on the carpet. "I said I would," Daniel replied. He remained standing, distance as armor. "We need to be careful." Lena looked up then, her expression sharp. Careful stopped being an option. Daniel took a breath, choosing his words like offerings. He spoke of discretion, of support, of arrangements. He promised money, monthly payments, medical care. He framed it as responsibility, as compassion. "No one needs to know," he said. "We can handle this privately." Lena listened without interrupting, the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the gaps. When he finished, she stood slowly, closing the space between them. "You don't get to decide that," she said. "You don't get to erase me." Her voice trembled despite the strength she forced into it. She spoke of fear, of doctors and pills and a future rewritten overnight. She spoke of the baby, of wondering whether love or illness would be inherited first. Daniel flinched at the word baby as if it were a weapon. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "If I had—" "You knew enough," Lena cut in. "You knew you weren't supposed to be there. You knew who you were." Silence pressed down on them. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the dresser. Cash, thick. He slid it toward her. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Take it. Let me fix this." Lena stared at the envelope, then laughed, a short sound edged with pain. "You can't fix what's inside me," she said, "and you can't preach your way out of this." She pulled out her phone, holding it between them. "I recorded our calls," she said, "including tonight's." Daniel's face drained of color. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "I already did," Lena replied. "This is my insurance." Panic cracked through his composure. He argued, pleaded, warned her about consequences. He spoke of his wife, his church, his calling. Each word sounded smaller than the last. Lena listened, unmoved, power shifting with every breath. "I don't want to destroy you," she said finally. "I want you to acknowledge what you did, publicly or privately, your choice." Daniel's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, masking fury with false calm. "Give me time," he said. "We'll make an agreement." Lena stepped back, wary but resolute. "Time is something I don't have much of," she said. "Neither do you." She gathered her things and moved toward the door. Before leaving, she turned. "If you disappear, if you lie, if you touch me again without consent," she said, "everything goes public." The door closed behind her, leaving Daniel alone with the envelope still on the dresser, untouched. He sank onto the bed, head in his hands, breathing hard. The bargain had been struck, fragile and dangerous. Outside, Lena walked into the night, gripping her phone, knowing protection came at a price. Neither realized how tightly they were now bound, invisible chains pulling them closer to a future neither could control. Daniel remained seated as the motel sign flickered outside the window, counting the cost in breaths. He told himself agreements could be renegotiated, leverage found, pressure applied quietly. Across town, Lena drove with headlights off, replaying his promises and threats, wondering which would arrive first. Both felt the same tightening fear, a sense that unseen eyes had begun to watch. By morning, calls would be made, records checked, and patience tested. The chains were set. Consequences would soon prove heavier than money. Days passed like slow-moving shadows. Daniel returned to the church, standing behind the pulpit as if nothing had changed. Parishioners smiled, shaking hands, praising sermons on virtue and truth. Each word he spoke felt hollow now, weighed down by secrets no prayer could cleanse. Even Rachel Harper, his wife, noticed the tension but chalked it up to stress. He nodded at her distractedly, forcing a smile, while the memory of Lena's warning echoed relentlessly. Everything goes public. Meanwhile, Lena tried to regain normalcy. She attended the clinic, swallowed pills, and managed work at the strip club, her mind always elsewhere. Every interaction reminded her that Daniel's shadow loomed over her life. She avoided her usual friends, fearing loose lips, and moved carefully through streets and neon-lit rooms, hyper-aware of who might be watching. Despite her independence, she felt a tether to Daniel, an invisible chain she could not break. Daniel grew increasingly paranoid. Every knock on the church door, every ringing phone became a potential threat. He instructed his assistant to filter messages, installed surveillance cameras in the hallways, and double-checked locks at night. No movement went unnoticed. He even questioned his closest friends subtly, trying to gauge if rumors were beginning to circulate. Faith, once a shield, had become a cage of fear and desperation. Enter Mark Ellison, a private investigator quietly hired by the church board after whispers of impropriety reached the elders. He was methodical, observing patterns, cross-referencing movements, and noting behaviors that suggested concealment. Daniel noticed Mark's presence subtly but dismissed it, assuming no one could connect the pieces. Lena, too, was unaware that someone had begun tracing her calls, her clinic visits, and even her trips to grocery stores. At night, Daniel replayed the motel conversation, gripping the edges of his Bible, wondering how much power he still had. Each promise made to Lena felt like a rope around his own neck, the leverage she held invisible but suffocating. He realized that control was an illusion. Every decision could be exposed, every lie amplified. Meanwhile, Lena felt the pull too. She had leverage, yes, but it was a double-edged sword. Acting too soon could be dangerous. Waiting too long could be fatal. The tension grew unbearable for both of them. One evening, Daniel received a cryptic letter slipped under his office door. It contained a copy of Lena's medical records and a note. "We know what you've done. One wrong move and everything ends." His heart raced. He recognized Mark's handwriting from subtle surveillance reports he had glimpsed in the church office. Lena, unaware of the letter, checked her voicemail and found a new message. An unfamiliar voice warning her that she was being followed. The air tightened around her as she realized the invisible chains binding her were more real than she had imagined. Decisions were no longer theoretical. They had immediate consequences. By midnight, both Daniel and Lena were pacing separate rooms, trapped in their own fears, each feeling the unseen weight of threats and promises. The invisible chains had drawn tight, binding them together in a dangerous dance neither could control. Daniel stared at his reflection, whispering a prayer he no longer believed in. Lena gripped her phone, planning her next move with precision and caution. The next morning, Mark Ellison uncovered something alarming in hospital records. A link between Daniel and Lena that was far more documented than Daniel realized. This revelation set the stage for a collision neither of them anticipated. The invisible chains were tightening, and soon the first crack would appear. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the consequences of exposure were inevitable. Lena's labor began in the early hours of a humid Texas morning. The neon lights of the city had faded to gray dawn, and the streets outside were quiet, almost reverent. She gripped the hospital bed rails, teeth clenched, sweat soaking her hair, her body trembling with pain and fear. Months of uncertainty, months of secrets and threats had all led to this moment. Daniel Harper had been informed, reluctantly, that he needed to come. Even now, the thought of facing the outcome made his stomach churn with guilt. He arrived quietly, hands shaking, careful not to draw attention. Lena lay exhausted, the baby's heartbeat faint but steady on the monitor. Their eyes met for a brief, tension-filled moment. No words were exchanged, nothing needed to be said. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him harder than any sermon ever had. Lena, meanwhile, stared at him, a mixture of fear, anger, and cautious hope etched into her features. She had survived the fear, the illness, the threats, but the unknown consequences of this birth still loomed like a shadow. Hours passed in agonizing suspense. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently, their calm professionalism contrasting with the emotional storm surrounding the room. Daniel could barely breathe as he watched Lena struggle through each contraction. Memories of their first encounter, the motel, the bargaining, the threats, played over and over in his mind. Each one felt sharper, more brutal, as if the pain of the present were feeding on past mistakes. Finally, the cry came, a tiny, fragile wail that pierced through the tension like a blade. Lena exhaled in relief, tears streaming down her face, the raw intensity of childbirth mingling with the emotional storm she had carried for months. Daniel's chest tightened. The baby's arrival changed everything. No longer was this just about concealment, secrecy, or bargaining. A life now existed, innocent and vulnerable, tethered to the consequences of their actions. A nurse approached, swaddling the infant and placing the child in Lena's arms. She cradled the baby with a mix of awe and exhaustion, whispering soft words of reassurance. Daniel stood a few feet away, silent, his hands shaking as he grappled with the realization that his sins had produced something beautiful yet terrifying. The weight of his guilt intensified, the knowledge that no amount of money, secrecy, or manipulation could undo this. The room grew still. Daniel and Lena exchanged no words at first, both caught in the magnitude of the moment. Then Lena spoke, her voice fragile but determined. This baby is the only truth left." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard, the words too heavy for speech. He reached for his phone, tempted to call his wife, Rachel, but stopped himself. Nothing could be explained, nothing could be justified. A nurse stepped in with a test report, and Lena's face tightened instinctively. Daniel's eyes followed the nurse's movements, dread coiling in his chest. The report revealed preliminary results about the child's health. Daniel tensed, bracing for the worst, while Lena's grip on the baby tightened, fear and hope battling within her. "Everything will be fine," Daniel whispered more to himself than to her, trying to inject reassurance into a situation that felt utterly uncontrollable. As evening descended and the fluorescent lights dimmed to night mode, a nurse accidentally left the door slightly ajar. Daniel overheard Lena speaking softly to the infant. "I'll protect you. No matter what happens, I swear." His stomach sank as he realized the implications of her words, not just for him, but for the life now entwined with theirs. Before he could react further, a hospital staffer approached with concern. "Pastor Harper, you shouldn't be here alone. Privacy regulations." Daniel nodded absently, unable to tear his eyes away from Lena and the newborn. A sense of impending doom pressed in from all directions, suffocating, inevitable. By nightfall, Daniel left the hospital quietly, footsteps heavy on the linoleum floors. Outside, the city lights blurred through the windshield as he drove home in silence, the weight of the day pressing down like a tangible force. Lena remained in the hospital, cradling the infant and trying to plan her next steps carefully. Both of them were acutely aware that the arrival of the child had altered the balance. Decisions that once involved secrecy, leverage, and fear now carried irreversible consequences. One simple life had changed the trajectory of everyone involved. And yet, in the quiet, unspoken fear, neither fully grasped that this fragile being might be the key to exposing the secrets they had fought so desperately to hide. The baby had arrived, and with it, a chain reaction that could not be contained. Tomorrow, the stakes would rise, and the invisible chains would tighten, pulling both mother and father inexorably toward a confrontation neither was fully prepared to face. The hospital corridors were silent except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional beeping of monitors. Lena paced her room, the newborn swaddled in her arms, her mind spinning with questions and fear. Every sound outside the door felt amplified, every footstep a threat. She had expected Daniel to act cautiously after the motel confrontation, but the unpredictability of his desperation unnerved her. She knew she could no longer wait passively. She had to assert control over the narrative, protect herself, and safeguard her child. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to the church with a mask of composure plastered across his face. He prayed, but each word felt hollow. The envelope of cash he had given Lena sat heavy in his drawer, a reminder that money could not erase what had begun in secrecy. Something larger was at play now, a reckoning he could not manipulate through charm, sermons, or threats. The thought of parishioners' trust being shredded by rumor, the looming scrutiny from the church board, and Lena's leverage over him gnawed at his mind relentlessly. Mark Ellison, the private investigator, intensified his efforts. He had obtained copies of hospital documents and cross-referenced them with Lena's movements, building a quiet but undeniable case. Surveillance footage showed Daniel arriving at the motel, entries and exits from Lena's apartment, and her trips to the clinic. Mark had also discovered partial payment trails suggesting hush money. The pieces formed a picture too precise to ignore, a web that tightened invisibly around both Daniel and Lena. Daniel noticed the scrutiny creeping closer. Phone calls he had thought private were returned with hesitation. Office staff avoided eye contact, and even the subtle inquiries from his assistant hinted at discovery. He attempted to reassert control, arranging meetings with church elders and suggesting charitable donations to distract attention. But each effort only raised suspicions. Secrets that were once his alone began leaking into public awareness in small, dangerous increments. Lena felt the pressure from another direction. A cryptic text arrived on her phone. "We know about the baby. We know about the diagnosis. Watch your back." Her grip tightened on the child. Whoever had sent the message was close, knowledgeable, and unafraid. She realized she could no longer act alone. Protection required careful strategy. Every contact, every plan, carried the risk of exposure. The tension escalated when Rachel Harper, Daniel's wife, began noticing discrepancies. Late-night trips, evasive answers, and unusual phone behavior created a subtle but growing suspicion. Rachel did not yet know the full extent of the secret, but her intuition began to prick at the edges of his carefully constructed world. Daniel's internal panic grew. He knew exposure was imminent, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Mark Ellison eventually made direct contact with Lena, presenting evidence that Daniel's actions were not isolated incidents, but a pattern of deception and recklessness. Lena felt vindicated but also frightened. Having proof brought both clarity and danger. She understood that moving forward would require courage, planning, and constant vigilance. By nightfall, both Daniel and Lena realized that nothing remained hidden. Every whispered threat, every carefully timed silence had failed. Daniel's control had slipped, and Lena's leverage was now a weapon, tangible and unavoidable. The invisible chains that bound them tightened, constricting every move, every thought. Outside the hospital and the church, the world moved unaware, but the walls around Daniel and Lena were closing in fast. A final message landed on Lena's phone as she prepared to leave for the day. "Tonight, someone will come to find the truth." Her heart raced, clutching the baby closer. Across town, Daniel stared at his reflection in the pulpit mirror, pale and shaking, realizing that the world he had meticulously built was now poised to collapse. The stage was set, eyes were watching, and exposure was no longer avoidable. The collision of secrets, lies, and fragile lives was imminent, leaving both of them teetering on the edge of consequences that could not be undone. The church was silent that night, the pews empty, shadows stretching across the polished wooden floor. Daniel Harper moved quietly through the aisles, careful not to disturb the calm he had worked so hard to maintain. He had arrived earlier than usual, claiming a desire for extra prayer, but the truth was heavier. He carried the weight of secrets, the fear of exposure, and a gnawing anxiety that Lena's leverage over him could erupt into something uncontrollable at any moment. Meanwhile, Lena had vanished. She hadn't returned home or called. Her sudden disappearance gnawed at Daniel, twisting his mind with suspicion and dread. He paced the sanctuary, glancing at the baptismal font where so many had found redemption. Now it seemed ominous, a silent witness to sins far darker than any confession could absolve. His pulse quickened, hands trembling as he gripped the edges of the pulpit, the faint echo of footsteps from the parking lot making him jump. Hours later, a janitor arrived for routine maintenance and froze at the sight in the main hall. Lena's body lay sprawled near the baptismal font, lifeless, pale, a thin red stain spreading across the tiles. The infant's cries from her last visit haunted the silence, the idea of the baby safe somewhere else barely soothing the horror. Daniel had not yet been called, but the report would reach him soon enough. He felt as if the walls themselves were closing in, each breath of air a reminder of guilt pressing down. When police and forensics arrived, the scene was documented with methodical precision. Blood pooled around Lena's body, reflecting the faint glow of overhead lights. Investigators photographed everything, noting fingerprints, footprints, and the faint scuff marks along the aisle. Daniel's name appeared on a witness list due to prior connection, but he had not yet been summoned. Still, he knew instinctively he would be implicated. Inside his home, Daniel sat in darkness, phone vibrating incessantly with missed calls and urgent messages. Each buzz seemed to hammer at his chest. He avoided the screen at first, but finally answered. A detective's voice explained briefly, curtly, that Lena Moore's body had been found inside the church. Daniel's knees buckled. The reality of her death, the weight of their shared secrets, and the inevitability of exposure collided all at once. As the investigators combed the crime scene, they discovered his fingerprints near Lena's body. An envelope of cash was also found discarded in the hallway, a chilling echo of the motel bargain weeks earlier. Daniel's stomach churned. He realized that the evidence, circumstantial yet damning, placed him squarely at the scene. Fear, anger, and panic tangled inside him as he thought of how one impulsive meeting could trigger this cascade of consequences. Rachel Harper arrived unexpectedly at the church the following morning. Her eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of the crime scene, horror twisting her face as the truth slowly crystallized. She had begun to suspect her husband's involvement in secrecy, but seeing the blood, the evidence, and the whispers from investigators shattered any illusions of innocence. Daniel remained silent at home, contemplating how his carefully maintained facade had collapsed in a single night, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. By evening, the church was cordoned off with yellow tape, reporters circling from a distance, the local community buzzing with gossip and fear. Daniel sat in his study, staring blankly at his Bible, realizing that the bargaining, manipulation, and desperate attempts to maintain control had failed. The blood on the baptismal floor had transformed speculation into certainty. And yet, amid the horror, a single disturbing thought struck him. Someone else had been in the church that night. Surveillance footage and witness reports hinted at an unknown presence. The investigation was only beginning, and the true web of deceit and murder was far from unraveling. The collision of secrets, guilt, and unseen forces was accelerating, and Daniel understood that the coming days would demand decisions that could either condemn him or reveal a shocking twist in the case, setting the stage for a confrontation no one saw coming. The police station buzzed with quiet urgency, fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over worn linoleum floors. Daniel Harper sat in a stiff chair, hands folded tightly, sweat pooling at his temples despite the cool air. Investigators paced slowly, questioning witnesses, reviewing surveillance footage, and cross-checking timelines. Every word he had spoken to Lena, every visit to the motel, every whispered threat now loomed over him like a shadow that refused to fade. Rachel Harper arrived soon after, summoned by detectives who were probing inconsistencies in Daniel's story. Her eyes, sharp and suspicious, searched his face for cracks. "Where were you last night?" she demanded, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Daniel answered carefully framing his words to seem cooperative yet detached. He repeated the events as he remembered them, emphasizing concern, responsibility, and shock. Yet Rachel's gaze betrayed disbelief. She could sense gaps, motives, and hesitations that words could not hide. Meanwhile, Lena's friends and colleagues were interviewed. They told conflicting stories. Some claimed she was planning to go public with the recordings, while others said she feared exposure and would have remained silent if Daniel had complied with her demands. Mark Ellison provided a detailed account of his investigation, linking hospital records, phone calls, and motel visits. The narrative was complex, layered with manipulations, half-truths, and assumptions. Each version of events painted a different picture, each one pointing fingers in opposite directions. Daniel's mind raced as investigators cross-referenced statements. "Why would she record you if you weren't threatening her?" one detective asked. Another suggested, perhaps she wanted leverage, or maybe she feared for her safety. Daniel denied any wrongdoing in the strongest terms he could muster, emphasizing the accident, the bargaining, and his attempts to maintain control. Yet each denial seemed to create more suspicion, making the truth a slippery, dangerous thing. Rachel's anger grew as she pieced together timelines herself. She recalled late-night trips, suspicious phone calls, and unexplained absences. Her confrontation with Daniel escalated, their argument quiet but intensely emotional. "I trusted you," she shouted, voice breaking, "and all this time you were hiding everything." Daniel remained calm outwardly, but inside panic clawed at him. He realized that his web of lies was collapsing from multiple directions. The police soon discovered surveillance footage showing someone else inside the church the night of Lena's death. A shadow moving near the baptismal font, careful, deliberate, and unseen until now. Investigators were puzzled. Daniel insisted he had not been alone, yet the footage suggested another presence. Motives became tangled. Who else had access to Lena, who might have wanted her dead? The narrative split into multiple threads, each as plausible and dangerous as the other. By late evening, Daniel was left alone in the interrogation room, lights harsh, walls unyielding. He replayed the events in his mind, questioning himself, wondering which version of the truth would be accepted, which would condemn him. Outside, Rachel stood silently in the hallway, torn between loyalty and the overwhelming fear that the man she married might be capable of more than deception. The chapter closed with a tense, unspoken question. If both Daniel and Lena had manipulated reality in their own ways, who held the final version of the truth, and who had the power to ensure it would be the one that survived? With surveillance evidence hinting at an unknown figure, the stage was set for revelations that would shatter assumptions, expose hidden motives, and push the investigation toward a shocking confrontation that neither Daniel, Rachel, nor the authorities were fully prepared to face. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, and unforgiving. Rachel Harper sat across from detectives, hands folded jaw tight. Her face was pale, eyes sharp with determination. She had seen enough inconsistencies to know that Daniel's version of events could not explain everything. Lena's death, the motel recordings, the surveillance footage, it all pointed to a tangled web of lies and manipulation. Yet Rachel had her own secret. She had confronted Lena days before the murder, though no one knew it. That confrontation now weighed on her conscience, a silent burden that could alter the course of the investigation. Daniel remained at home, pacing. The silence around him was suffocating. Every creak of the floor, every distant car horn felt like an accusation. He knew Rachel had begun asking questions, and he feared what she might uncover. Each lie, each half-truth, now carried consequences far beyond what he had imagined. The bargain with Lena, once a means of control, had grown into a chain tightening around his neck. He realized that silence, which had once protected him, now threatened to destroy him. Meanwhile, Mark Ellison reviewed evidence once more. He had compiled hospital records, phone logs, and witness statements, but one detail stood out: Rachel's unexpected presence at the church days before Lena's death. He knew this could complicate the case dramatically. The cost of silence, Mark mused, was often greater than the act itself. Those who held secrets found themselves trapped, unable to speak without incriminating themselves or others. Rachel's confrontation with the police was deliberate yet careful. She explained her limited involvement with Lena, avoiding full admission, yet her words carried subtle implications. Detectives pressed gently but firmly, sensing her hesitation and realizing that her silence had a price. The room grew tense as Rachel recounted her observations of Daniel's late-night absences and odd behavior. Her voice trembled occasionally, betraying both fear and frustration, but she maintained control over the narrative she revealed. Daniel's paranoia escalated. He imagined every phone call, every text message, every glance from his congregation as evidence against him. He tried to plan his next move, to negotiate outcomes, but the cost of silence became painfully clear. Remaining quiet no longer shielded him from suspicion. It magnified it. The longer he waited, the more others began to fill in the gaps, interpreting his omissions as confirmation of guilt. In another part of town, Lena's friends whispered in hushed tones about what she had known, what she had feared, and what she might have intended to expose. The more people talked, the more impossible it became to contain the truth. Her recordings, once a tool of leverage, now threatened to unravel multiple lives. By nightfall, Daniel sat alone, staring at the walls, realizing that silence had not preserved him. It had isolated him. The very choices he had made to protect his reputation and conceal his actions had created a trap from which there was no easy escape. Meanwhile, Rachel stood outside the police station, watching the city lights flicker, knowing that the truth was no longer theirs to control. The chapter closed on a chilling thought. Every secret, every withheld word, and every manipulated story had a cost. For Daniel, Lena, and Rachel, that cost was rising steadily, threatening to destroy everything they had tried to protect. The first cracks had appeared, and soon the walls of silence would crumble completely, leaving only consequences in their wake. The stage was now set for the final revelations, where choices made in secrecy would collide with truths that refused to remain hidden, leading inevitably to the ultimate confrontation. The courtroom was tense, every seat filled with faces eager for answers, for justice, for a reckoning. Daniel Harper sat at the defendant's table, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled from sleepless nights and relentless worry. The walls seemed to close in, whispers of the congregation, the press, and Lena's friends all echoing in his mind. He had tried to manipulate, bribe, and conceal, but the chain of consequences had finally caught up to him. There was no pulpit to hide behind, no sermon to cleanse his sins. Rachel Harper sat in the front row, expression conflicted, a mixture of sorrow and anger etched across her features. She had discovered the full extent of Daniel's deception. The motel meetings, the hush money, the betrayal, and the events that led to Lena's death. The betrayal cut deeper than she had imagined, and yet part of her still mourned the man she once trusted. The judge began reading the charges, each word sinking like a hammer. Murder, endangerment, obstruction of justice. Daniel's stomach tightened. He had counted every risk, every lie, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of the law. Mark Ellison watched quietly from the gallery, knowing his investigation had led to this moment. Evidence painstakingly collected, timelines meticulously reconstructed, and the recordings Lena had left behind. All had culminated in Daniel's arrest and inevitable trial. Daniel's defense attorney made the usual arguments: coercion, secrecy, miscommunication, but the truth was undeniable. Public sentiment had already judged, and the court only confirmed what everyone suspected. Daniel's thoughts drifted involuntarily to his child. The baby, born innocent and fragile, had become the center of all the chaos, the proof of sins committed and consequences endured. Fear gripped him as he imagined the child's future, knowing that his actions had forever altered that life. He realized that redemption was no longer an option. Every choice, every attempt to hide, every lie had built a tower of guilt too tall to escape. Then, moments before sentencing, a nurse approached the court officer with a small envelope. The officer handed it to Daniel, hesitant, almost as if delivering hope to a man who had none. Daniel opened it carefully, hands trembling. Inside was a medical report. His child, the baby who had unknowingly carried the weight of their mistakes, had tested HIV negative. Daniel's breath caught. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, the judge pausing mid-sentence, the gallery sensing the shift in the air. For a moment, Daniel felt a flicker of relief, a tiny ember of light in a life shadowed by darkness. He looked at Rachel, at the gallery, at Mark Ellison, and realized the truth. He could not undo his sins, could not erase Lena's death, could not reclaim the life he had shattered. But in that one unexpected detail, he glimpsed a possibility, a fragment of innocence preserved despite everything. The judge cleared his throat, the gavel poised to seal his fate. Daniel swallowed hard, his mind still reeling, yet for the first time, he understood that consequences and justice did not always align with hope or loss. The room went silent, the tension absolute as the gavel fell. The sound echoed through the courtroom, final and irrevocable. Daniel Harper was sentenced. He would pay for his crimes, his betrayal, his manipulations. And yet, outside the walls of the prison, somewhere in the quiet, his child remained untouched by the disease, a living reminder that even in the darkest stories, some fragments of light could survive. Daniel sat back, chest heavy with guilt, yet his eyes glimmered with an unspoken acknowledgement. Redemption had eluded him, but life in its quiet resilience had delivered a small, unexpected mercy. The story of sin, betrayal, and murder had reached its devastating conclusion. But one innocent life had survived the storm, leaving the audience with a haunting, bittersweet sense that even amidst horror, hope could endure.